You're listening to the Soul Career Podcast, the podcast that brings you stories from people who've taken a risk to discover careers that fill them with purpose and make them come alive. I'm your host, Lysandra Ricketts. Now for the episode. So today I have the pleasure of being joined by DJ DiDonna, founder of the Sabbatical Project, an organization that brings together researchers, companies, and advocates working to catalyze sabbaticals and their enabling policies for people everywhere. So most of the people I've had on the podcast this year, I met through Harvard Business School, and it's not intentional. It's just how it went. These are the people that I know, so don't hold it against me. And DJ is no different. He was in my year at HBS. And my last memory of you, DJ, was actually when we were all moving out after graduation and you bought the TV from me and my roommate. And then I decided, well, I kind of want that TV back. And then you brought it back. You were such a good guy about that.
I
So
love how that
welcome to the
started.
podcast, DJ.
Yeah, great to be here. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Okay, so tell me a little bit about the Sabbatical Project. What is it exactly?
So the Sabbatical Project really started after my sabbatical. So I took 4 months off from my job as a founder of a fintech company, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. And really, I came back from that saying, of all the people that I spoke to had taken this time off, it was just the thing that changed people's lives the most out of anything. So what's going on behind sabbaticals? What's happening? And why is there no information about it? I feel like when you Google it, you'll get someone's blog post about how it changed their life, but there's very little research. The term itself is kind of reserved for professors. And it just felt like for something so transformational, so kind of universally transformational, I wanted there to be a little bit more kind of, detail and information.
Mm-hmm.
So something from anecdote to evidence. So we started this. I pulled together with a professor from my alma mater, Notre Dame, who studies flourishing and thriving at work, Matt Bloom, and then eventually started working with professors at HBS as well, around how can we actually provide evidence and figure out what's going on with these extended breaks from work. And the resulting research and advocacy, and everything you see before you, is just the Sabbatical Project.
Yeah. Actually, I say this all the time that it's been my dream to be able to take 3 months off of work every year, like professors, to replenish myself and get my creativity back and read books and just come back refreshed and ready to go again. I would love to do that. And my dream is to actually go to Spain 3 months out of every year. I lived there when I was in undergrad for a year and I love it there. And I just never felt like I was allowed to do it. Like I had permission to take that length of time off. Is that one of the big black barriers that you see people face?
Yeah, I like to say that the three things that folks need are permission, inspiration, and a blueprint. So, it's amazing, especially among our classmates, right? So we're 10 plus years out from graduation, and we had our
You're aging
virtual
me now, DJ. You're aging me now.
high school. No, and we were set to have our 10-year anniversary last year, and I was supposed to kind of speak and present the results.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many folks who graduate from a place like Harvard don't feel like they can take a couple of months or a few months off throughout the entirety of their career. So think about 40, 50-year career. No one's taking that amount of time off just to do things that pile up, whether it's reading or, hiking the Camino or, spending quality time with family or friends. Life just kind of goes by. And if folks with this much privilege, and we'll get to that, I think later, don't feel like they can take time off, then how is everyone else supposed to?
Exactly. Yeah. I just felt like I would be a bad person or I would disappoint my board when I reported to a board if I tried to take up sabbatical, or I was worried about money, or I was worried about my team, them reporting to me, what would happen if I wasn't there. So, and then all of these, now that I'm running my own company, I'm like, that it was all a fiction because I needed it. Right. And if I was at the point of burnout, I would prefer to take a sabbatical rather than quit. Most people just quit rather than ask, can I take a sabbatical, right?
Right. And what would the board have preferred you to do? Leave 2 years earlier, or, be able to take a few months off. So
Yeah.
I think what you're pointing to, it's exactly what we're trying to do, which is you have a story. We all as a society, have a story about what work is like and what time off is like. And it turns out from all the folks that I've talked to through our research interviews, and then just, folks like you kind of coming to me and hearing about it, there's a lot more stories out there about really successful business people incorporating it into their normal business career, about folks taking time off because they waited too long and dealing with burnout, or addressing health problems, and folks taking it sooner because they knew someone else who did, and just having a transformational experience. So it's really about, I think, telling different stories, and if it appeals to folks, if it kind of plants a seed inside of you, great. But yeah, it's about changing that narrative.
Exactly. So you've been doing a lot of research on this. What are some of your findings? What are some of the trends you're seeing in the research?
The interesting thing about the research, so I had my own experience. I had the anecdotes from all the folks that I spoke to after coming back. And then, you work with a social scientist who kind of opens you up to their research on identity and, flourishing and thriving. And you just find kind of terminologies and a set of kind of literature around the experiences that you had. So it was nice to be able to put these things into context. I might say, I had a transformational experience, and the literature says something like peak life experience. And so, you
Mm.
know, things that you kind of look back on your life and say, that was one of the most important things in my life. This seems to stack up, with those. So having a baby, getting married, things like that.
Mm.
Um, and really what's happening is, what we kind of put forth is that it's creating this space, this liminal space in between one thing and another, where you can kind of work on your identity. So
Mhm.
as running the Branson Center for so long, like that kind of becomes who you are, right? And stepping away from that and saying, well, wait a minute, before that I was a consultant, and then I was like an MBA student, and then I was doing this. But who am I, and how is that changing over time, is just hard to do when you're in the thick of it. And so this provides a safe space for you to kind of step back and say, oh, actually, I used to fancy myself a musician or an artist, or I've always wanted to be a teacher. And regardless of those things, I'll go back to that in 4 months. Like, what are just the things that I want to explore for this time? Because I'm a curious individual, right? Or a passionate person, or someone who loves to be in Spain, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that, what the research shows is that it's a peak life experience, one that you can choose, right? I mean, oftentimes things sneak up on you, like the death of a loved one, or traumatic experience with work or getting fired, but you can actually choose this one. Gives you a space to kind of work on yourself and your identity and explore. um, and I mean, one of the other observations is that the majority of these things happen because of a negative event. Because we aren't proactive, and we have this story around, what would it look like if I took time off, or I couldn't afford it, or whatnot. We wait until it's too late. We wait until the burnout, or something else kind of happens to us. And when that happens, it takes you longer to heal, and then start the process of kind of growth and exploration after that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I have quite a few clients that are on sabbatical right now. Some I had to convince that a sabbatical was okay because they came to me and it was just so clear that they were deeply exhausted. And if
Mm,
they pushed themselves further to keep working, they would have a mental health crisis, possibly,
mm,
or at least an existential crisis. What is the meaning of anything? Which is what happened to me at one point, right? What is the
mm,
point of any work because I was feeling so tired, not the Branson Center, but before the Branson Center.
mm,
So I had to convince them, and now that they're on it, they're more creative and they're exploring, and they don't want to come off of sabbatical. So that's another thing. I'm afraid that once I take a break, I will never want to go back to work, right?
mm,
And then we have some of my clients who were made redundant during the pandemic, so we're a forced sabbatical, but we're happy to have some time to understand who they are and so on. So, like you're saying, anecdotally from my client pool, it backs up some of what you're saying, the research is saying. Now, in my research, you had a few really interesting statistics on your TEDx talk that really stood out to me. One is that the average career is now 50 years long, and that if you take 6 months off every, 10 years, it's just a small percentage of the lifespan. So tell me some of that. Those statistics are super jarring. So I'd love to hear it from you. Like, what are you finding there?
Yeah, I think going back to the story that we hear about work, right? Um, I think, my parents' generation, it's this, like, you have a job and you hold on to it, and the job, will pay you a pension over time, right? And so you don't want to lose it. That's definitely not the story of our generation. So it looks like we're going to have, upwards of a dozen jobs over the course of our lifetime. And
Yeah.
so,
Wow.
in that scenario, who knows? I mean, who cares, and who knows if you took 2 or 3 months off in between jobs, right? And I don't know if you got a chance to take any sort of time off before business school or after, um, but like no one knows or cares when your start date was 10 years ago, right? And so, thinking about it just as taking 3 months off every 5 years or 6 months every 10 years, it's 5%. It's really not that much time. And the density of memories during that period will kind of stay with you and kind of, loom over large in your life because of what you can do during that time.
Yeah.
So I think that, as the other thing that I talk about, I believe in the talk, is just how, part of our role as employees and humans is to manage our own career. So because we're not working for the same company for 50 years, where we get trained and, like adapted to the new different jobs that we'll move into, like we have to take that on ourselves.
Yeah.
The academic research calls that the protean career.
Mm.
And what that basically means is like you have to kind of take the torch and you have to say, I need to learn data science. I need to learn, better management principles. And so you can imagine taking some of that time off to train yourself up. And as you said, if healing is part of the thing you need and rest, then that's on you. No one's looking at your maintenance records and saying, we're going to hire Lysandra, but before we do, we should give her a couple months to take it easy. You got to do that yourself.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So that brings me to exactly how do you do it? Because a big part of the reason most people don't do this is money, and most employers right now are not open to 6 months. Like, where are you going to go for 6 months and paying you to take 6 months off? So one of the findings I found on your website, I'm just going to read it straight from your website. The majority of our interviewees, these are people who've taken sabbaticals, had prestigious degrees, sufficient savings, and or the privilege of an exemplar or personality, which made the prospect of taking extended time off a real possibility. In order to realistically expect most individuals to take multi-month sabbaticals, our expectations around employers must evolve. So let me ask you this question. How's that working out for you? Are we changing
Uh,
employers' minds here?
Yeah, I think so. And not to go back to the same thing, but it's really about the story that we hear, right? So, um, one of the things that I've found is that I'm just kind of digging up anecdotes from companies and individuals and seeing, like Adobe's had a sabbatical policy since the beginning. And,
Ooh,
companies like Salesforce, where like Mark Benioff's idea for Salesforce came from his sabbatical. And so they're actually it's actually quite prevalent. Now, the question is, can people afford to do it? Is it just, yeah, you can take time off and we won't fire you? Or is it great, you can keep your benefits, but we won't pay you? Or is it, hey, we'll pay you full fare and enjoy your time off?
right.
That's obviously not the place where we are now, but to remind you, in the past 20 years, parental leave policies in the States went from absolutely non-existent to getting there, and the fact that we have, both maternal and paternal leave, we're getting there. And so I think that, talent follows benefits these days, and if folks are asking for it, it can kind of show up, especially in the competitive, hiring environments. But really, it's a lot of companies who have those policies don't really want to talk about it publicly because they want to make it on like a one-off basis, a case by case basis. And I think it's time that we just share those stories more broadly, because a company that has a short-term mindset is thinking, well, I got to make my numbers in the next quarter, and if this manager is not there, it's going to be tougher. But
Yeah.
if someone's thinking from a medium-term mindset of, rejuvenating your staff, making it a place that feels like someone can work for a large portion of their career versus I can only do this for a few years before I get burnt out, like that's kind of what it's all about. And
Yeah.
in my old business, we were selling kind of innovative credit scoring to banks in emerging markets. Banks never want to be the first, but as soon as they see their competitors doing it, they're going to hop on board the train. And so, you might have seen in December, I think Citibank released a 12-week sabbatical policy during the middle of the pandemic before, like the general public had access to vaccinations. So it's clearly something that's gaining momentum and happening. But, businesses, they don't want to be the first one to do it. And then they think that all their people are going to leave and go somewhere else. So we need to show kind of social proof.
Hmm. That's great. Okay, so is this your soul career, DJ?
Well, I'm interested to think of, so my thinking of a career, obviously based on what I said about the number of jobs, is that it's kind of like it's a journey, right? And so I feel like if you lose sight of like what you're passionate and curious about during the course of that journey, you have to ask yourself, am I still on the right path? Kind of like wayfinding. The reason I'm dedicating this portion of my life to this is I actually think it can make a huge difference in the world. I think that people who can get that perspective and stand back can actually return back to the workforce and to their life more likely to care about other people and more likely to do work that's important to them and important to the world.
Yeah.
So for this kind of portion of my life and my career, absolutely. I chose it intentionally. I'm taking risks to do so. I love being known as the guy on vacation writing a book about vacations. That's always super flattering. So until we get there, it's a bit of a risk, but I'm pretty happy and confident where we are right now.
So I want to start working our way back through time to how you got to this point. So shortly before you launched a sabbatical project, you were on sabbatical because you burned out in your previous career. Tell us what that previous career is and why you burnt out and went on sabbatical.
Yeah. So when I went to business school, my goal was to continue doing something entrepreneurial, to do something more kind of global in scale, and to do something that made a positive difference in the world. Our first case in business school was actually on Endeavor, and I think the
Yes,
person you interviewed about sabbaticals recently was from Endeavor,
yes,
and
exactly. You
it
listened
was,
to that podcast episode?
of course,
Oh, wow. Yeah. I want to connect you two because I feel like you guys should meet.
yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was the first time that I learned of this like for-profit social enterprise, and I was like, great, you can do good and also do well. And so I just kind of made my intentions known among the section and among folks that I met, and I never applied for a single job while I was at HBS. I was just kind of like making it such that I had to do the thing that I said I wanted to do, and found a professor from the Kennedy School who had done research on how can you help countries develop, and their hypothesis was access to finance enables people to kind of live out their virtues and their life's purpose. And so how can you increase access to finance by helping banks see human potential? So took that technology using psychometrics to understand creditworthiness.
Our trajectories are so parallel. How did I not see you in all my macroeconomics courses at HBS? I feel like a group of us did all the macro courses together. I didn't see you in them, but we did the same things. Okay, sorry. Go
Well,
ahead.
I got to be the dumb business guy while the professors got PhDs in economics, so it worked out well. Specialization, but yeah, so spent the next 7 years just living out my dream. So talk about soul career. It was doing good in the world. I lived in South Africa and Kenya and Indonesia. Our company was based in Peru. It was just traveled to 60 countries, and that was exactly what I felt I should be doing. And more importantly, we were making a difference. So $2 billion was lent against the tool that wouldn't have been lent otherwise to entrepreneurs across the world.
Wow.
Um, and I think so. The confusing thing is, and I'm curious to hear what you say to your clients about this. Is like, it felt totally natural to burn out at some job you hated, you know,
Mm.
but to burn out doing the thing that you felt like you were supposed to do, that's what kind of created the existential questioning, right? Um, so I wasn't as energized by what I was doing. I feel like I wasn't bringing my best self to the plate. I was growing even worse facial hair than I have now, and my co-founders were like, "Are you okay?" And but secondly, so that's like the burnout story, and then the other story just is I had lots of stuff I wanted to do. I wanted to walk like a long pilgrimage. I wanted to focus on some things that, when everything's urgent and busy, you don't spend time on. And you just can't fit that stuff in. Like, especially as an entrepreneur, you're always 6 months away from total failure, 6 months away from, success.
Yes.
And so, like, I think you can tell the burnout story, and that might be the story that resonates with a lot of folks. But there's other folks that are they're doing fine, they're chugging along. And it's not until they pick their head up that they realize, like, man, like, this is not like, I want to do some other things for a while. Yeah. And those are the funnest people to sit next to at like dinner at weddings. And they're like, no, but I'm fine. Like, I don't even know what I would do with myself if I took 3 months off. And you're like, that's kind of a red flag. If you can't even, aren't we all marching towards retirement? So you're going to have to get better at not doing at some point. Um, and so, that was like this warning of like, okay, well, we started this business. It's my business. I should be able to figure out how to take time off. And so we created a policy, and I was the first one to take it, and, took 4 months. And during those 4 months, I thought, you know what? Like, if I want to do more than one thing over the course of my life, I have to end that thing at some point.
Mm.
And we had a great management team in place. My co-founder and I had both like spent a year or two trying to figure out how we could take time off and get separation. And so I thought, if it doesn't go well because I leave, that's not so great. But if it goes better when I leave, that's amazing. I think it's time to kind of to look at the next thing. So it's not all like burnout, woe is me, I couldn't drag myself to work. I think there's a lot of, you can't do two things at the same time really well.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much I want to talk about in what you just said. Let me start with psychometrics. So I always have to find out if you've done psychometrics. I want to know. Let's start with Myers-Briggs. What's your Myers-Briggs, DJ?
I saw that in the meeting notes. I think the last time I took it was ENTJ, but
Interesting.
especially given that, like, having run a psychometrics company, I think I'm bad at taking tests like that now, because it's really hard not to see what they're asking you. And that was our biggest question. Was people would say, well, how can you possibly figure out if someone's honest? Like, they know they're taking a test to get a bank loan, so they're not going to say, I would steal the money. And really what we would do is we'd use metadata in order to see, like, okay, we're going to give them the opportunity to cheat. We're going to give them the opportunity to go back when we tell them not to go back. And we're going to observe not what they say they do, but what they actually do. So long way of saying ENTJ, I should probably take it again.
You should.
But yeah, why
I
would
That's
you?
so interesting to me. I'm ENFP,
Mhm.
which is the complete opposite of what you should be if you want to go to HBS, right? But my experience anecdotally has shown that people who are ENTJs, ENFJs are it's easier for them to exist within a corporate structure, and so it's harder to make that decision to leave and do something nomadic. Whereas the
Mm.
P's, ENFPs, ENTPs, ESTPs, right? They're more nomadic by nature. My career has been quite nomadic, and I've been very comfortable trying something different, starting in private equity, then going into accelerators, then going into now coaching and training and all sorts of things that I'm doing now, because I'm collecting experiences in the way that I craft my life. But for more structured people who are naturally more structured, they want to see like a steady upward trajectory, and
Mm.
taking a sabbatical feels like falling off of a cliff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think for me, I mean, when we started the company after HBS, I was making 60 grand a year and like living in my friend's parents' house in Nairobi. And like that felt totally fine to me.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that doesn't feel fine is when I feel as though I'm not making a decision that's aligned with who I am, right?
Mm,
So I didn't care at all that folks, that we went to school with were going to be making a lot more money than us right after graduation. It was like, no, I'm very confident about this. But when I felt like I lost my way and was confused about what I wanted to do versus what I was doing then, that kind of threw me off. So I
yeah.
guess my corporation is like the exploration.
Yes.
I
Yeah. Definitely.
don't know.
And then the other thing you said that was really interesting was that you ran a psychometrics company. Was that the fintech company? Were they the same
Mhm.
company? Oh, okay. So how
Yeah,
did you use psychometrics in that company?
so imagine adding on to an existing bank application, not just what's your address and what's your job, but um, you know, kind of questions more about who you are. And if your shop burned down, would you invest in a new shop or go to another shop? And asking people more questions about what they want to do and how they perceive themselves. So this might resonate more, like it's like a venture capital interview of getting to know the whole person,
Yeah.
but at scale for small scale loans.
Wow. So the way I answer those questions, I would never get a loan, but I'm actually quite credit worthy in real life. So that's interesting about psychometrics for me too, is that my personality type, ENFP, I should be this nomadic influencer, journalist, but actually I have been very dedicated in my career. So the training can compensate for what the
Mhm.
underlying psychometrics can say as well.
Well,
All right. Yeah.
it's not to say that entrepreneurship was the thing we were measuring for, right? So like traditional, I think that a few things we learned, and we can talk about this forever. It sounds like
I
since
know,
you,
right?
but a few things we learned uh, is that it's really not about risk taking as it is risk understanding and mitigating, right? So someone says, I ride a motorcycle really fast without a helmet. That's not what you're looking for.
Right.
And the majority of defaults were people just never intending to pay the loan back anyway, so it's fraud. And so you want to try to check, root out fraud at first, and then try to figure out who has like the ability to understand and mitigate risk. um, Someone like my mom, who's the most honest person you've ever met in your entire life, that's great, but that might not be the best characteristic to make money if you're working in a cash only marketplace, in Nairobi, right? And so
Right.
like you need to understand the world around you and be able to like work within that context. Just as someone who's super risky or someone who is going to be totally dishonest is a fraud risk. So
Right. Okay. So I'm so tempted to go on a tangent of where you've lived in the world, this attraction to developing markets, credit worthiness in developing markets. But let me just pause right there, get back to my show script here, and ask about. So I know you sold this fintech company that you created, which is a very exciting experience to entrepreneurs. So can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
yeah, I mean, I can tell you that for the sale, every time it went through, which is once, we had at least four times where it didn't, right? So I'd say it's a process, and it feels very lucky. And the times when you felt like you deserved it didn't go well for reasons outside of your control. And so I think the interesting thing about the sale was that I decided to leave the company and step back onto the board after my sabbatical before we had kind of started negotiating the sale. Whereas I had managed a couple processes before that had fallen apart. And so, like, the interesting part of my story, I think, is that you have this impression that, like, oh, you started this company and sold it. My
And still
experience was my experience was that we started the company and then we tried to sell it. We, had acquisition offers and they didn't go through for various reasons. And I had to step back away from the company saying, will I be okay as a person and my ego and identity if we don't sell it,
Yeah.
or not? And so I stepped back saying, yeah, I'm fine with that. And then it came, within the next year, which is a bonus on top. It's a cherry on top. But I had to be fine with like that thing you did for 7 years. No one else externally will see it as a success except you, probably.
Wow.
And it turns out that that wasn't the case, but it's a character building moment, I think, for me. And that's kind of the way that it really went down.
That's so interesting to hear. The biggest takeaway for me is something I tell my clients all the time, which is when you stop chasing, you start attracting the thing that you
Mhm.
are chasing, which has been very true in my life. It's like an energetic thing that happens to me over and over again, where when I just let it go, step back, the thing that I was chasing just comes much more naturally and much more quickly than when I was like, trying to go back, go after it. Um, so that's really interesting to hear. The other thing is, I have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to the podcast who are hunting a sale. They think that is what is going to make them rich. They want to sell, get rich, take a break, do the next thing like you did. But I love hearing that it's not the first time, the second time, the third time. You got this close and it all fell apart 3 times before it actually working out on the fourth time. So it's not like you can spend 6 months and sell the business. It's like a process that you're constantly working at, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I advise folks on entrepreneurship now, I think the things you're guaranteed how much you pay yourself, right? Like whatever you can eke out. You're guaranteed time with your coworkers and your customers,
Mhm.
and you're guaranteed the kind of lessons that you learn. And if those things are enough for you, then you'll be happy for sure. If you need that like fourth kicker of, oh, and then you make 10x of your salary because you sold something, just the numbers are against you. And my experience, which might sound a little jaded, but it's just way more luck than you want to base a decision on. I think there's timing there, there's all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, one of the times that the acquisition didn't fall through was right before our 5th year reunion, and we were going to be bought by a public company, and they had their earnings were less than they wanted, and at the quarterly announcement, and just like that, all acquisitions were off for 3 quarters. And
Wow.
so you're like, you just can't get that invested in it. So you got to make sure the things you can control, which are who do you work with, who do you work for, can you be satisfied on your salary, and are you excited about what you're learning? I think that's all you're guaranteed.
I love that advice. And that's kind of how I'm living my day to day experience building this company too. I'm just loving my clients, loving seeing this thing that was just an idea, just a concept in my head take on a life of its own. Has been very rewarding, and we'll see where it takes me from here. But I have to ask, did you 10x or did you not 10x?
Pass.
You put it out there, DJ. You just left it there for me to ask. I'm so sorry.
I thought you were worried about soul and everything. It sounds like bank account talk.
That helps the soul too, a little bit. Okay, so one thing that I've always wanted to know, that I haven't asked you yet, is your background. I actually don't know your backstory. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What was your life before HBS? Because I'm so curious to know what is in you that attracted you to Kenya and Peru and these places that you've lived.
Yeah, we moved around a lot in the States. I'm from all over, born in Florida, New York, Texas, Colorado, went to school in Indiana. So I got to see all the different parts of the States, which is cool. But I think the reason why I wanted to work a little bit in international development was I went to this Jesuit high school, and they, like, every January you had to do a month of service. Like, they didn't have classes, and you had to like go, this is in Denver, so like go and work at the Head Start kindergarten school and paint the walls. And it was just like their whole mantra was like education and service to others. And it just implanted in my brain. And, I think it's difficult to just focus on the place where you're from when you know that there's so much greater need elsewhere. And like I said, that first case at HBS where I was like, oh wait, I could kind of scratch the entrepreneurial itch and do good for the world and explore the world, be a citizen of the world, was attractive to, like a white guy whose resume was like 7 years in Indiana before business school. So now I can tell you like a good place to eat in Jakarta, and I've got friends all over. And it actually, between you and me, like on the HBS classmate side, it gave me an awesome opportunity to get to know a lot of our classmates that I wouldn't have gotten to know
Yeah,
otherwise.
live
So
internationally. Yeah.
yeah, but
Everybody that comes to Jamaica from HBS looks me up on the directory, and I get to have lunch with lots of people that I didn't meet from all the years, not just from
yeah,
our year, So it's great living outside the US and being the welcoming party for anyone here from HBS.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we did a deal in Dominican Republic, and I did that, but never made it to Jamaica, unfortunately.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, I went to a Jesuit high school in Jamaica, Camden.
Oh, nice.
So that's another thing that we have in common that's really interesting. Yeah. So, okay. So now I want to get to the part where we talk about like tips that you have for our audience. And I asked my previous guest, Laura, who was on sabbatical, took a 2-year sabbatical, what her 3 tips were for taking sabbaticals. And now you are the expert. You're becoming the recognized expert in sabbaticals in the US, especially when this research comes out. I'm sure that will be even more true. So, what are your 3 tips for people thinking about taking sabbaticals?
I wish I would have gotten to the end of the episode before we had to hop on, or else I could have used some of hers. I think that I think that so one thing that really matters, I think, is duration. People will ask, this is a classic type A question, like, what's the shortest? I hear you, but like, what's the shortest amount of time I can take off and get these benefits? Our classmate James Allworth, he would say like, well, what's the shortest amount of time you can visit Paris, right? Like, sure, you can try to cram it in, but so I think that you should really try to spend at least 2 months, ideally 3 to 6 away if you can. And that means you're away. That means you're not like doing consulting on the side. You're not like still connected to work email and checking in every once in a while. And I'll talk about why that's important in the third point. But the second is disconnection. And I think there's 2 ways to think about that. One is the obvious geographic, can you travel? Can you get out of your like normal routine space? Because that just helps us get out of that same mindset, surround ourselves by different people, different routines to really like allow ourselves to kind of, grow and change.
Mhm.
And the second way I think you can disconnect is by like entering from your brain into your body. So find that thing you want to do that's like yoga or painting or scuba dive, like something where you're out of your head all the time and you're just like living in kind of your physical body more,
Yes,
doing something with your
so
hand.
important. Yeah.
And the third thing I would say is just like like let go of your plan. um it's okay, like if you're on vacation, right, like you have to have a plan because you have like 7 days and you can't, if you miss your flight you're screwed. If you're on sabbatical, like you miss the bus and that becomes part of the story, and then you end up staying at someone's house in Mumbai and like staying with a family for a week. I mean, that's where the kind of the adventure starts. And I think both for the sake of the adventure, letting go of your plan, and also for the sake of kind of like feeling what that feels to not live your life in that controlled way that got you to the place you are now, right? It's just
That
an
gives me
experiment,
so much anxiety just thinking about that.
right?
It's easier for a man to do than a woman because we have more, threats, right? Because I would love to walk El Camino in Spain, but I have to think about where will I be safe? What places will I stop at along the way so that I can be safe, right? It's hard for me to let go of that plan.
Yeah, I mean, different folks have to have all sorts of different journeys,
Yeah.
right? And I think that I've talked to lots of women who were like, okay, I wanted to do this, but I want to travel with my brother or a partner or something like that. So, not everyone can have the same journey at any time, right? Some people might have to wait for 5 years until their company is at a certain place. Some people need to save up for 10 years. Some people need to go with partners so they can't spend a month meditating by themselves. Like there's always constraints, but I think that operating within those constraints and just doing it, then maybe the next time it can be ideal, or maybe you find that the way you did it is exactly what you needed.
Mm. That's beautiful. And your first point about taking at least 3 to 6 months off, why is that period of time important?
It's just kind of following the data. I mean, almost everyone that we talked to just said it took so much longer to disconnect and just be than they thought it would. And again, that depends on if were you burnt out? Were you in like a traumatic situation? Was there a negative catalyst to your time off? There's a lot of variables, but I would say whatever amount of time is the most you've ever taken, like at the end of that time, I bet you will be like, oh man, it just feels like I'm getting started, right? I mean, everyone's had that experience where just as you're about to like return back from vacation, you say, but I just
Yeah,
got to the place where, right?
yeah,
Um, you realize that you're just kind of living and a month flies by, and what's the big deal? Why not just take 2 months? But one thing I think we hadn't talked about as much that I want to make sure is out there is like this right now is very much a privileged thing to be able to do, both from like a financial standpoint, obviously, but also just from a personality and mental standpoint. So some people had the privilege of their parents being Australian, and so like the Australian government gives all the civil servants a year off with pay, right? Some people had friends who did it so that they would see like an exemplar in their life that did it and came back and turned out fine. So there's a lot of privilege involved, and I think when you get to the point where a company is giving you pay and benefits to take time off, and your boss is doing it, and your coworkers are doing it, it's just part of life, and it's not a big decision. There's foundations that fund nonprofits to take sabbaticals, the Durfee Foundation in LA, the McGregor Foundation in Detroit. Like, we can do this, and there's clearly people that think it's the best thing they could possibly do for their portfolio companies. Just gotta tell those stories.
absolutely. And I love that you made that point because when I spoke with Laura about how she was able to take 2 years off, she said she had to rely on her husband during that time, to pay the bills in the family. And if you are single, if you are lower income, if you live in a country that doesn't have a social safety net, you may not be able to find the time. And which is why it's so important that we kind of flip the conversation from the employee trying to take time off to the employers making it important to giving their staff time off to recover and come back fresh and ready again. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
So
my just last piece on that. My hypothesis is that obviously employers are full of people who are employees, right? And
mhm,
so you know, as many managers, folks in charge of talent, HR leaders that can take time off, like that's when you see the benefit, and you're like, oh, I could see my staff benefiting from this, and also just as a human being, this is an amazing thing to do, um, and it's an amazing thing to be able to enable my employees to do. I think that that's how change is going to happen as well. So I'm trying to go like bottom up, take it if you can, tell people stories so they know it's available to them. Top down, help companies realize the business case behind it, and that's how change I think will happen.
absolutely, completely agree with you. So DJ, how do you envision your career from here? What is the next step for you after this?
It's a good question. I was just getting those Google photo things that they send you when it's like 4 years ago this day. I was just wrapping up my I took a 6 week walking pilgrimage in Japan, where I walked like 900 miles. I was just wrapping it up, and I recently just bought a house. I'm living in San Francisco. Like, all of these things that I had no idea I'd be doing 4 years prior are happening now. And so I think like what I wish for is that I'll be able to take time in another 3 to 5 years to step back and say, okay, this is how I spent my last batch of my career. What do I want to do next? Um, and not try to predict where I want to be in 5 years. But I think what I'm hoping to do with the Sabbatical Project is working on a book, and really trying to help just empower people to go live their life and kind of explore their own journey. And I think through doing that, it'll I'll be walking through a door in which other opportunities are available. So I'm excited, but got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. And I think you are an amazing example of someone living a soul career. Every step you've taken post HBS has been very intentional for the way that you wanted to design your life around your core values of seeing the world, of giving access to finance to the underbanked, and now of encouraging people to put their mental health first by taking a break from or 50-year careers and just taking time off to just be. DJ, I'm so happy that I grabbed you and got you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Awesome. Good to see you again and excited to continue the conversation.
Awesome. Okay.
If you love this episode, remember to hit subscribe and leave us a review. And if you're a professional, executive, or entrepreneur that's interested in taking one of our coaching programs, head on over to soulcareer.com and sign up for a free consultation. We would love to hear from you.